simplest thing I can say about how to manage fear is to believe and accept that the threat that you feel from fear, at least that initial response, needs to be challenged.
Welcome to the Executive Connect podcast. Did you know the average person spends 4 years of their life worrying? Are you one of the many people with high potential that is paralyzed by fear? Are you ready to take the next step to reach your full potential? Dr. Benjamin Ritter specializes in fear and how to harness it to lead us to our best lives. Welcome, Dr. Benjamin.
Thank you so much for having me. I was just reflecting on how I have not felt fear from a conversation or an interview in a very long time, especially if it's virtual. But in person, then I got some stories for you.
I love it. Well, that's a great first statement. So tell me, from your perspective, what does it mean to be fearless?
To be fearless, maybe that you are not being held back from anything that you actually really want to do. It's about having no limits. It's about never doubting yourself. It's about being able to make the most of situations. And a little disclaimer, it's not about actually not doubting yourself, but it's not allowing doubt to hold you back from taking action. And so generally being fearless is that you do what you want to do without being held back by the unknown or a lack of confidence or just anything in general. You take action.
Even when you're really scared, I find, you mentioned in person being fearless or being fearful when you're in person. I know when I first had to speak in front of people, I was so scared. I thought I was going to shake and fall off the stage and forget all my words. And so thinking about strategies and how they help bust through fear that one may have, what strategies have you found to be the most effective in managing fear and stepping out of your comfort zone to bust through those fears?
Mm-hmm. So generally interrupting the fear cycle, but I'm going to say something, it may or may not resonate with some people yet, but if it doesn't, listen to it again. So when I would go maybe speak in person at an event, I do it pretty regularly, and some of them are more important to me than others, and I sometimes get this response. And I think it was very similar to the response that I got when I went to get surgery for the first time at the doctor's office. I would just all of a sudden start shaking. My legs would start shaking, my arms would start shaking. I'd be sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, I don't feel afraid. I don't feel like I'm not going to do this, but my body is responding to the situation that it's in. And I think it's very important to create a distinction between, is this something you're going to do, but still feel uncomfortable doing it? And your body is just generally going to react to it. Because there's certain things we can control and certain things that we can't control. We can control if we're taking action and going through something that we think is important to us. We can't control, at times, our physiological responses to fear or to something that we're uncomfortable with. And with exposure and with some other strategies, we generally can reduce the impact of that fear. But it's important to just at least kind of distinguish between there are certain things we can do and certain things that we can't do based on just working through things with our thoughts and interrupting the fear cycle. So overall, fear is a feeling. That's all it is. It's information. It's defined by your thoughts based on the fact that you believe that this thing is something that you're supposed to be afraid of. And oftentimes we misrepresent the feelings of fear as danger instead of just defining them as an occurrence, as something that's happening and just information about a situation that we want to do something about. And so the simplest thing I can say about how to manage fear is to believe and accept that the threat that you feel from fear, at least that initial response, needs to be challenged. And you need to just double check, just go, okay, I understand this is what I think. Let's explore why that is before we decide not to take any action.
Yeah, that's a great, fantastic point. So when how do you differentiate between actual healthy risk taking, like taking a job out of your comfort zone, from actually being reckless in pursuit of your ambitions?
Hmm. Well, I'm not the one to judge if you're being reckless, and generally nobody is other than yourself or the people that your life impacts. So let's be fair. I cannot judge your actions. I cannot say that it's bad to be reckless or to, because I have my own aversions to risk. I have my own risk preferences, and the things that I feel that I'm comfortable doing may be things that you aren't comfortable doing. And so I kind of want to move away from this idea of how do we know if our actions are right or not? Well, how about, does it relate to something that you want to accomplish in your life? And do the things that you want to accomplish then relate to the values that you believe that you represent, like who you are at your core? And if so, and you're holding yourself back from those things, then that fear, you might need to question it. So generally what we want to do is take a look at our goals and take a look at our values and say, am I doing everything that I can? Am I being intentional to achieve these things? Or am I holding myself back from something that we might say is fear? Like, for example, I can't tell you how many clients that I work with that are afraid for applying to certain jobs because they doubt that they're good enough. But those jobs relate very much to their own career goals. And applying for a job in itself has a very low success rate. So that action would not be serving them. And so we can look at actions like that to say, based on your career goals, based on your values of who you are and how you want to show up in the world, is the thing that you're holding yourself, is that are you holding yourself back from those things?
So would you say that's a mindset shift with people, or how do you address that? So not applying for a job that continues to come up and people don't take it, for example, because they don't think they're good enough, or maybe they're only, 50% of the way qualified. Is that kind of do you have to do mind shift work with them or help them, you know, develop, the skills to feel comfortable with applying for the job? Maybe the job calls for other credentials that they don't have. Like, how do you address that for people that,
Mm-hmm.
won't or haven't applied for jobs?
Yeah, well, everyone's different. And so that's the power of coaching. Coaching says, here's this thing you think is important. So like, let's say we've done a bunch of work. We've gotten clear on who you are, what you believe is important, and what you're working towards. Awesome. So we have your goals, we have your values, we know it's important to you, we have clarity. Now we go, great, go work, go do it, go hold yourself accountable, go try to achieve the things that you want to achieve. And then you find out, well, a week's passed and you haven't done anything. Okay, so it's not knowing what to do that's the issue. What else might it be? And so at times it can be, I don't believe in myself enough. I don't think I have the skills. I don't have the skills to do the thing. Maybe it's just a knowledge gap. But often, and it could be that your environment isn't set around yourself to serve you. And it could also just be that you're afraid. You're afraid of changing something for whatever reason. And so then, depending on where you are as an individual, we have to dive into those reasons and figure out what they are. Because generally, if you're not doing something, something's holding you back. And you peel back the layers until you figure out what that thing is that's holding you back. And oftentimes when I work with clients, kind of have this little quote. We've made shirts around it. It says, feel your feelings. So you're feeling something. Great. Instead of reacting to it, take a step back, feel whatever you're feeling, go inside your body, see if is your heart racing? Okay. So just recognize those things. Don't judge them, recognize them. Now think about your thoughts. Now, what are you thinking about? What is actually going on in your mind? What are all the phrases and words? And so often in fear, we go, I'm afraid, stop, run. That's it. But instead we should go, I'm afraid, why? And then you go, why? And you go, why? And you think about your thoughts. You're feeling your feelings, thinking about your thoughts. And this is the big one. It's don't believe your beliefs, which means I'm labeling this thing as fear, this thing that is terrible. It's going to destroy my life. It's going to hurt me. I'm going to be in trouble. Go, hold on a second. What if that wasn't true? What if we could challenge that and say, I want to achieve this thing. What's a different belief I can choose to then make progress towards it? And so each person, depending on the situation, we can talk about maybe even applying for jobs as an example, will require different strategies depending on what the person's struggling with.
Yeah, I love that. I know one of my mentors that I've had as a very young, I would say child, when I was 8, he would tell me, now, what's the worst that could happen if you, take your, training wheels off your bike and you fall? Like he used to tell me all the time when I was younger to try things and go and think about what's the worst thing that could happen. And if I was comfortable with the worst thing, then I should kind of pursue whatever it was that I was fearful about, or jumping off the high board, or dive board as a kid. I'm like, that's too tall. What if I, hurt myself? And so I always learned that I had to consider what's the worst case scenario. And going back to your example, like the job. Okay, so what if you apply and you don't get it? Apply again. What's the worst case? That you applied for the job and they said no. But what's the best case? You get the interview, right? So do you, in your arsenal of tools, is that, do you have any specific tools that you suggest people use in order to take bold actions to whatever they're trying to achieve, whether it be a job or, maybe asking a girl out on a date? It could be something completely not professionally related. It could be something personally related as well.
Yeah, what you have to do is just basically make the thing that you want and the strategy that you're going to use to try to get there more important than the fears that you have. And the what's the best thing, what's the worst thing is a very good example of something that you can do. You can basically say, if this thing is going to work out, like for example, if I get selected for this job, is that more important to me? Is it going to change my life in a positive way? And is that more important than the discomfort I feel from potentially getting an automated rejection letter in an email? So that's a great strategy you can use. So understanding kind of what you like, understanding the actual fear, which is understanding your feelings and your thoughts and your beliefs, and then putting into perspective the thing that you potentially could achieve. So really detailing that out. Generally when you're working through fears, focusing on the pillars of self-leadership can be very impactful. So you can do exercises for creating clarity, exercises for creating confidence, and exercises to make the environment around you like you're more in control of the situation that you are in. It's oriented towards whatever your goals are. And so within the situation, such as applying for jobs, I think it's a little simple, but why don't we go for it? The clarity is, okay, so does your current job allow you to live your values personally? So we've identified your values, we've explored, aligned, and defined them. Let's say no. So that's a big one right there. It's to say, okay, what I'm doing right now is not how I want to be defined in the world. That's a huge desire. But now we want to say, well, okay, so how might I want to actually achieve these values or show up in the world professionally? Well, maybe you're working at a company you don't believe in, a job that you don't believe in, with a leader that is toxic and not helping you grow as an individual. Maybe you have coworkers that you don't really get along with. Maybe the organization itself has terrible boundaries. And so then you go through, okay, what are my goals? I want to work at a place that has positive boundaries. I want to work at a place that has this and this and this. So you define your goals. And generally, if you know which way you're going, it's much easier to act in a way that aligns to that. If you don't know where you're going, this is generally what happens with people in fear. You get stuck. You listen to the fear, because the fear is a greater voice than the fog of ambiguity that you have about how you're living your life. So maybe you can do some exercises about defining your goals, your direction, what potentially is needed to actually move in that direction. Another one is just believing in yourself and confidence. So maybe you don't apply to that job because you're telling yourself on a daily basis, I'm not good enough, or I don't deserve a job like that, or I'm not qualified for something like that. And if you fully believe that, you're not going to take action. So then if this is what's holding you back, we go through and start doing some reframing. As you mentioned, I think you mentioned that word prior, which is, okay, if you think you're not qualified, let's explore why you are qualified. Let's explore all the reasons why you might be a good fit for this role and bring a benefit to this organization. And then you have to then emphasize those beliefs on a daily basis through a couple different strategies, something as simple as a Post-it note, something as simple as an alarm with you speaking it to yourself. But generally, when you are re-emphasizing beliefs, it needs to happen regularly, and you need to have supporting reasons, or else you're not going to believe it. And the other piece would just be control. So you're never going to apply for a job if you don't have time to apply for jobs. If you're coming home at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night from work and you're drained because of your toxic boss, and you're just going to say, what's the point? I don't have time for this. I just want to eat. I want to watch some TV and go to bed. So then control is about changing your environment to be more supportive of what you're trying to achieve. So that could be creating boundaries. It could be developing relationships. It could be hiring a coach. So depending, again, on what's holding you back would then change the strategies that we would use for the individual that's struggling. But nothing is more powerful than convincing yourself that you have nothing to be afraid of, believing, changing your frame of reference of fear to information instead of truth.
Yeah, I love two things that you said. I or probably my two favorites is being self-aware and mindful, right? First, a lot of times people I don't think know what their values are. They think their values are, one way and they're actually the other way. So I love that you pointed that out because you can't really get where you're going if you don't know what your values are, like you mentioned with a toxic work environment. So I think some self-study is key to breaking through and becoming, fearless in whatever the tasks you are trying to achieve. And what about accountability? Do you think that having an accountability partner helps people, bust through some of their fears?
Anytime you can have support towards what you're trying to achieve, the more likely you are going to achieve it. If it's hiring a coach, or if it's setting a deal with a friend, or it's attending a group, like with the job piece, it's go to a group every single week, or attend a virtual meeting with these kind of job search networks that are online. That anytime that you know that someone else is counting on you, not just yourself, and you can put that extra pressure on you, you're going to be able to probably hold yourself accountable. Now, they could have the opposite effect, where you get embarrassed and you feel too much pressure, and so you distance yourself from those relationships, which sometimes you see, but then you have to work through some of the other internal struggles that we've already talked about. um, Accountability, it's not just that it helps you stay kind of committed to your actions, but generally it also surrounds yourself with more positivity. And oftentimes when we're afraid of something, we're reinforcing that fear through negativity, through people around us that have those negative beliefs about us, through our own mental conversation that we're having on a regular basis. And so if we want to help motivate ourselves to take action, we also have to make sure that we have a good cheerleading squad.
Absolutely. Made me think of something when you said that. A lot of times I set reminders for myself in my phone. Like instead of calendaring them for something, I calendar them to myself about something I'm working on. So, holding myself accountable or something I'm fearful about doing and reminding myself to continue to take, bold steps in whatever I'm, fearful about. So from your perspective, do you have a personal experience or something that you can share with our listeners about maybe something you were fearful about and you pursued and achieved?
I think I was a little bit lucky because I had a lot of disappointments early on in my career that led me to be pretty fearless. So I wanted to be a professional soccer player, and you can, the percent chance that that's going to occur is pretty low. But for some reason, I got it in my head that it was something that I needed to do, that it was my purpose and my passion. And so when I lost that, I was really left without any sort of identity of self. I didn't really spend any time developing relationships and friends. I was pretty socially awkward at the time, because I was focused so much on practicing and practiced like 3 times a day. Didn't really watch TV, didn't go drinking, didn't hang out with people, just was kind of like pretty empty when I lost that, because it was where I spent my time and what I believed I needed to spend my time on. And so I was pretty afraid of everything, like literally everything. But what's so great at that point in time is I had a choice to stay afraid. I had a choice to be no one and nothing, because I had nothing to rely on anymore. Well, I lost my crutch, or figure things out. And so I decided, and this is generally what will happen with clients when I start working with them when they're in fear mode. You turn away from fear, which is I'm going to lose something, I'm in trouble, something terrible is going to happen to me if I do this thing. And generally because you have expectations of what the outcome is going to be. And instead you put on your little sailor's hat or explorer cap and you go, I'm going on an adventure. And so I didn't have any expectations, and I just said, I'm going to explore what it means to be social. I'm going to explore what it means to be confident. I'm going to explore a variety of different jobs that exist in the world. And I'm just going to go explore life because I've held myself back so much. And if you're able to accept the role of adventurer explorer, to say, I don't have a map. I don't know where I'm going, but that's my map. My map is I'm going to wander and find things and see what they're like. And if it doesn't work out, that's awesome. I learned something new. If you can do that and put on that cap and go on that adventure, you will have incredible experiences and just not have fear, because fear then can't latch on to anything because you have no outcomes or expectations. And so for about 4 or 5 years, I explored life. I developed who I was, my identity, my values, myself, my relationships, my friends, etc. And I've had a couple mini journeys since then after that in different segments of my life, like my professional career and such. But after that, fear doesn't exist. Fear is not something that matters, because if I start feeling afraid of something, I realize that if a path doesn't work out towards a specific direction I want to go, I just pick a different path. That's what's so fun about being an explorer.
I love that you said that because I usually correlate it to shoes. So you correlated it to path. I always say, man, if that shoe didn't fit, I just try on another pair. So I'm gonna go with your path. That one sounds better. And I love that you've kind of trained yourself to be comfortable with, you know, changes, and I wouldn't call it fear or excuse me, failure. I would say it wasn't so much fear. It was you were just setting out, like you mentioned, on an adventure to figure out who you were, and what you were good at. And I think when you take it less, I'm not sure the right word, when you take it less serious and you're less serious about it and less um, difficult on yourself, I think it's easier to come out and learn more about yourself and say, wow, I tried, I was a soccer player and I actually really like tennis and I'm pretty good at tennis. And I think you make a really good point. Unless you try it and you explore something new, you'll never know what you are good at. And through that perseverance, you're able to find more about yourself and develop yourself and build confidence to bust through that fear, to get to whatever that goal is.
This is funny that we're talking about fear, because the example I'm going to use is about the book that I'm releasing this year called Becoming Fearless. And so to publish a book, you query agents. Like, you can self-publish, you can hybrid publish, or you can find an agent that wants to sell your book to a publisher. And I was talking to someone the other day, like a publicist, and like, what stage are you in? I'm like, oh, I'm querying agents right now. And I remember a piece of advice I received when I was sending out initial kind of queries to agents in the past, and it was, you haven't sent out enough requests until you can wallpaper your room in rejection letters. And I have 176 queries out right now. And I heard back no from a couple, but I also heard back a yes from today for more information. And life is like that. And applying for jobs is like that. I don't care how many people say no, how many automated rejections I get. And I was on a phone with a client this morning, and they were getting a little discouraged. And I say, 99% of the applications you send out are going to be no, because you're going to take one job. And maybe some other ones you have some interviews for, but that's just the game you're playing. And the no's just mean you're getting closer to a yes. And this is it's like a huge sales advice too. It's every person you say no, you're eventually going to get a yes, but count how many no's it takes to get to a yes. Because then as you're counting the no's, you're eventually going to get to the number where you get a yes. And it's the same thing with life. It's so the no's just show that you are actually taking action, that you're facing your fear. And if you're learning from those no's, if they're worth learning from, because a lot of the no's are it's just a data point. It generally doesn't have any sort of actual information you can take from it. But eventually,
Yeah.
if you keep going and you know it's going to work, you're going to get to your yes.
There's another point, a fantastic nugget that you mentioned in there. I think it's your attitude, right? So if you have 100 people reject you for a job, but you're only going to take one job. So through the 99 rejections, what are you learning through the process? Who are you becoming? And those, first 10 jobs that rejected you, maybe you decided, gosh, I'm not sure if I want to be in that industry anymore. If I have to go through, 20 interviews to get a job and rigorous things. I know some people have had many long interview processes, and they've come out of that process saying, I don't know if I want to work for an organization that it takes a year to get a job and 20 interview processes. And so I think you made two fantastic points. It's what you learn through your process, through the process of, rejection, if that's the right word, and then who you become and your attitude, I think is another, when you have your mindset on being a professional soccer player and that's all your energy, all your time, your entire being is in being that person, and then all of a sudden you have to pivot. You could have chose two things, to lay around and kind of feel sorry for yourself and realize your dreams and your life is over, or you could really grab those reins, get back on that horse, go figure out who you are, what you're good at, and put it out there to the world. And I think that those are fantastic points that you've made through your journey through being fearless.
Yeah, and I just want to comment on also being an executive leader, because I know we probably have some executive leaders listening. And I work with a lot of emerging leaders. I work with a lot of kind of directors and VPs, people that are being considered for greater leadership positions. And I can't tell you how many of them they accept the role that they think they are based on their job title, instead of act through kind of like the skills that they utilize the skills that they have. So someone's sitting in a meeting, not talking, not engaging because they think it's not their topic or not their place, but they have goals of continuing growing in the organization, developing relationships, solidifying an executive brand. But for some reason, they've allowed themselves to be boxed in. And being fearless relates to just, are you showing up in a way that is authentically you and not a way that someone or something that you believe you need to be? And in those moments, what's wrong with speaking up, challenging an executive's opinion, sharing your own, calling on someone because they haven't been talking that much? And I think often we just, because of fear or because of whatever beliefs we have, we stop being the person that we know we want to be or are. And I hope, and in terms of strategies, you could start small and say, okay, every meeting I'm going to just make one comment, or every meeting I'm going to ask one question. But you eventually start kind of building momentum towards the actual executive brand or person that you want to be within the professional environment in your life.
I love that. I think that's another great nugget is holding yourself accountable. Okay, I have this call with all the senior leaders and I need to speak up about something, whatever it is, and holding yourself accountable to do that is really key. And if you're in that role, there's a reason you're in that role. And it's to grow that organization's business. And so leaning into that and having an opinion is key, right? Or speaking up when they call on you, or if not, speaking up about something you're passionate about, I think is fantastic advice. Just kind of a couple, we all have setbacks in our journey, on this earth, and we all have things that are out of our control and that have set us back or pushed us forward. I guess in closing, any top three takeaways for our listeners on what they can do today to become fearless, or maybe any nuggets from your upcoming book you want to share?
Yeah, well, first off, as I was thinking about this as we were kind of hashing out that speaking up in a meeting kind of situation, we often get discouraged because we have a picture of who we want to be, and then we have the reality of who we are. And who we are today is struggling with fear. Who we want to be is maybe this person that's, at a podium leading an all hands meeting across an organization. Well, maybe we just need to change our picture of who we think we need to be today. And so if you're struggling with fear in public speaking, well, asking that one question can be a huge win, no matter if your voice trembled or you thought that it did, or jumping in a meeting and sharing a comment in the chat box with your video off is still a win. And so how do we just kind of alter our expectations a little bit and realize that dealing with fear and changing our beliefs and feeling comfortable in different situations is not something that happens overnight. It's something, even my own journey, 4 to 5 years, that was not an understatement. And I had still other experiences after that where I was learning how to deal with certain aspects of fear. So we have to give ourselves a little bit of grace and then make sure that we understand that the path moving forwards has milestones, it has objectives, it has summits. It's not just all of a sudden you get transported into this idealistic version of who you are without fear.
I love it. You know, it made me think when you said speaking. I remember the first time I spoke, Dr. Benjamin, I had to start my speech with my back to the audience because I was literally trembling. And I had the microphone and I turned my back to the audience and I said something. I forget to this day what I said to them. And I turned back around and they started clapping for me. And I think that changed speaking for me. And because I was scared out of my mind to speak, and even in a room with two people, nevertheless, this room had 50 people, and but like you said, you have to push yourself a little bit and set goals and objections, and um, really hold yourself accountable for who you want to become.
Hmm. Yeah. And that honestly is the key, is knowing who you want to become, knowing what you really want to achieve. And often the things that we say we want to achieve have not really been defined that thoroughly in our mind. And if a goal is just a little bit flexible or there's cracks in it, and you think you have to do all or nothing to make it work, it's never going to happen. So I'd say give yourself, like, figure out what those small steps are, but even before that, really create a picture of what you are working towards and why you're working towards it, and make sure that it's something that you truly want, because often we just have a bunch of things on our to-do list or our let's not be afraid list that don't really matter to us, because life itself is still comfortable. And we have to find what is going to make us the most uncomfortable to help us just really actually create finally that real desire and accountability to change.
Yeah, I'll give a plug to one of my favorites, Michael Jordan. I watched his biography and read some information about him on how he visualized for years and years and years making a basket and shooting baskets and doing the same thing and doing the same thing. But he spent a lot of time visualizing who he was and what he was becoming, even more so than he did actually throwing the baskets. And so I think that's a fantastic point, is who do you want to become and what do you want to do and what are your values? And if you're not living, I like to say your best life, it's up to you to make those changes, and to persevere through that fear.
Yeah, no one else is going to do it for you. Even
Yep.
if hire a coach, the person still can't do the work for you. They can do some of the things, but you're ultimately the one responsible. And it might sound really simple. It's not easy, but it's just has to come from a decision from you first.
Yeah, absolutely. So now that I know that you're launching a book, that's great news. Congratulations. I love it. Any insider tips you want to tell us about this book, or maybe teasers of what we could expect for your book?
Yeah, I think it's about 60-ish or 70-ish different tips related to becoming fearless that split into personal and professional. In the personal section, we cover things like mindset, overall your success, relationships, and then purpose, because purpose is played a pretty big role in my life, especially in relationship to fear. And then a professional section, we cover job satisfaction, leadership presence, and career growth. And in general, I thought these were kind of all the areas that fear tended to hold us back. And it covers a lot of the stuff we discussed today, but gives a little bit more kind of to-dos and action items that you can use to start working towards this fear. I mean, there's even one in there about engage in meetings and like make the most of your meetings. It was kind of talked about today, which is one of the greatest mistakes that I see people make in the professional world. Is that they want to grow in their career, they want to make a difference, they want to be seen as an executive, and they just stay quiet and they multitask, or they're afraid of sharing their ideas when it's really the best place for people to actually get eyes on your talent and your skills.
Yeah, it's a platform for you to share your because nobody's going to advocate for you. I mean, maybe maybe you have a boss that advocates for you, but sometimes you got to self-advocate and share what you know so people know that you know. Otherwise, you might get in a situation where people are either sharing your ideas and your strategies and they're getting the promotion as opposed to you getting the promotion. And so I love that. And I'm shocked that so many executive leaders are fearful to apply for the jobs and speak up because they're in that role for a reason, right? To lead teams and strategies and businesses forward and whatever its mission is.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. We tend to be our worst enemy in the workplace. I mean, I've worked with leaders that also they're so checked out, they're so resentful of maybe their manager or leader, or don't feel recognized enough that they've just stopped taking pride in their work too. So what do you think happens when someone doesn't feel that they're in the right job and stops showing up and doesn't take pride in their work themselves? So it just kind of builds on the cycle of negativity when it comes to work and takes away from their ability to actually feel satisfied at work. Or they can't say no, they have no boundaries because they're afraid of what it means for their potential job security and their livelihood. So they do everything, but because they're doing everything, they're exhausted, they're drained, and start making mistakes. And so guess what happens? And so fear in itself has so many negative implications when it comes to our success in the professional work environment, not just our personal life.
Oh, that's so good. I think our listeners are going to definitely love to hear some of the nuggets you gave us. Any closing thoughts or anything that we haven't touched on as it pertains to fearlessness that you want to share with the listeners?
Yeah, we try to change our whole life at once when it's I'm so unhappy with all these things, but each one of the things that we want to change, if we're not doing it, has some semblance of fear attached to it. And so you can choose to attack a little tiny bit of fear or all the fear at once. And you're going to be much more successful if you choose a little tiny bit of fear. So pick one small thing you want to take some action on and practice. Practice what it feels like to explore your thoughts and to feel your feelings and to question your beliefs around it. Write stuff down. Be your greatest champion within this area and take a small action that's going to prove that you have nothing to be afraid of.
That's great. I love it. That's great advice. Dr. Benjamin, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your time with our listeners. Connect with Dr. Benjamin, get his book. I can't wait to get it myself. And that's the Executive Connect podcast. Thank you.